My husband, Eric Johnson.
All right. Thank you. Well, good afternoon. Hope you're still alive and well. How many think Christmas is the best time of year? I'm a huge Christmas fan. I believe in Santa Claus. I believe in the elves. I believe in all of it. All right. Some of you are like, this is the last time I come to this church. Okay. No, I love all of it. I love the celebratory with an opportunity to just be generous even more and look for opportunities to give, and it's so fun. We love to kick off Christmas on the first Sunday of December, so we take the whole month just to enjoy the birth of Jesus and just everything that Jesus brought to us and to humanity. And it's just a month where we get to just kind of up things a little bit when it comes to generosity and just in such a giving, and I just love it so much. Well, I'm really looking forward to talking today. Candace and I spent the last week in LA, and our youngest daughter lives there, and we didn't want her to be alone for Thanksgiving, so we said, we're coming to you. And we had a blast. We had a wonderful time with her. And if you've not been to LA, it's incredibly populated. There's humans everywhere. There's lots of cars, lots of traffic, and I actually don't mind it. I enjoy going into dense populated areas. I think one of my favorite cities I've been to is Tokyo, which I just found out had over 34 million people living in Tokyo. It's the most densest, one of the most dense populated areas on Earth. And I love going into these cities or anywhere where there's other humans, and I love watching humans. I don't know if you're a people watcher, but my wife and I are people watchers. We love to just watch, and I always try to think, I wonder what their story is. I wonder what chapter they're in right now. And I don't know what it is. I'm just intrigued. I'm deeply curious about humans. I'm deeply curious about what brought you here and what made you live there and why are you doing this. And it's just something that it's not going away anytime soon. It's actually increasing as I get older and older. And in fact, even in this room, I'm so curious as to why you chose the seat to sit in today. I know some of you, you're in the same seat as day one when studio opened. And when that seat is taken by someone else, you make a note to yourself, I'm coming earlier next week to make sure I get my seat. Others of you, you just found a seat and that's just where you happen to sit. And others of you you're trying to sit next to someone. I mean, they're just interesting. And I don't know if you realize, but your subconscious has actually chosen the seats. Some of you like, the farthest seat away from other humans is the seat I want. And as we look at humanity, it's fascinating to understand that all of us right now in this very moment are in our latest chapter of the story of our life. We're in the most recent chapter. In fact, the most recent page, the most recent paragraph is taking place right now. And I'm intrigued by the reality of the disparity of the human experience that exists just in this room alone. We all come from so many different walks of life, so many different backgrounds, experiences. And in this room, we have people that have raised kids, and we have others that are just starting out. We have people in this room that you are just starting a new job, and others of you are really tired of your job. We have people in this room that this last week you were in tears wondering if the season you're in is ever going to end. And others of you right now are thinking, I'm in the best season of my life. We just have such a disparity of human experiences, and when I look outside this room, you can't help but notice the levels of volatility and unrest in humanity right now. Our social media feeds are schizophrenic on a bad day and bipolar on a good day. One picture is of a dream house and pumpkin spice lattes. And then the next photo you look at is night vision goggles of a bombing happening in the Middle East somewhere. And then the next photo is Steph Curry doing a no-look three. You see, we are inundated with information of what's happening of the human experience. Social media is just another way to see the disparity, the extremities of the human experience. And if you ever wonder why your soul is tired, or exhausted. That's why. Because your soul is trying to reconcile, is trying to compute, is trying to come up with an equation to make sense of it all. It's trying to figure out why is this happening and this is happening, and how come there can be two people in the same space and one is having the worst life and the other one is having the best life. And that's the complexities, that's the mystery of being a human. There's an old song from Dave Matthews called Funny the Way It Is. I want to read you a few lines from this song. It says, funny the way it is if you think about it. One kid walked 10 miles to school, another's dropping out. Funny the way it is, not right or wrong, on a soldier's last breath, his baby's being born. The way your mouth feels in your lover's kiss, like a pretty bird on a breeze or a water to a fish. A bomb blast brings a building crashing to the floor, and you hear the laughter while the children play war. Today, I want to talk to us about the human experience and how we experience life and the pressures of challenges and fear and struggles and crises and tragedies that we all face today, tomorrow, or yesterday. But I don't want to just talk about that. I want to talk about the connection to the reality of what becomes of you when you live in those experiences. And today I want to wrestle, and one of the dynamics that we have, at least for most people in this room, you said yes to God. You have faith in God. And I don't know if you've noticed yet. Have you noticed that because you said yes to God, life did not get easier? If you didn't know that, you're welcome. I'm saving you incredible time and frustration of confusion. And I don't know if you were told, but maybe that moment when you gave your life to Jesus, you said, I want to lay down my life and I want to repent of my sins so I can be forgiven and I can step into a space of spending eternity with God. And maybe you were convinced that in that moment that if you accept God in your life, life would become easier. And so you're told that, and so you say, I'm raising my hand. I want my life to be easier. I want all of that. And then first day goes by, and you're like, wow, life did not get easier. And some of you, like, it feels like it got worse. And all that really is you now have an awareness of how dark and evil sin is, and you understand the complexities of what it means to be human in a broken world. So yeah, and sometimes it felt worse. So you develop something that we call hope. And hope is, tomorrow life will get better. Tomorrow Jesus will take care of business for me tomorrow. Then tomorrow happens and you're like, wow, nothing changed. Then like, well, maybe it's the next day. Maybe it's the next day. Then you start going, well, my hope now is in the next season of my life, things are going to get better. And then pretty soon, before you know it, years go by. So then you have to ask yourself this question, what is my hope in? Maybe the definition of my hope or the expectation of what hope isn't accurate. You see, if we expect Jesus to rescue us in every situation, then I want to challenge you, we've missed the point. You see, all of us want a Jesus that stops storms, but the Jesus we need is one that sleeps in storms. You see, we all want Jesus to come in and just end the crisis, end the tragedy, end the bad days. But actually, Jesus wants you to learn how to sleep in them. He wants you to learn how to actually go through them. And all the while, we're attaching our faith to this reality, and we're trying to figure out, like, God, did God cause this? And today, I have no desire to get you into a existential quagmire or a theological conundrum. I don't want to get into that today because that's a whole deep conversation. But what I want to focus on today is around the reality of there are storms in your life. There are dynamics in your life at play, and you've been trying to get out of them, but maybe you're supposed to stay within them so you can develop something that you didn't know was possible. And if we can divert some of our energy and even reframe some of our energy around this, and if you fundamentally believe that God is going to make your life easier, you will have a PhD in disappointment. But if you fundamentally believe that following God is built on this idea of sacrifice and death and giving your life, then you'll begin to enter into the dimension that Jesus promised. If you have your Bibles, you can get there early. Matthew chapter 7. We're not going to read it right now, but for those of you that are high achievers or early achievers, or you just want to get ahead of the game, you're welcome. I just helped you out. There's an interesting experiment this place was built from 1987 to 1991. In the middle of Arizona, they built this dome. It's called the Biosphere 2. And they didn't call it Biosphere 1 because they felt like Earth was the proper biosphere. So they gave it Biosphere 1. So they created this environment in the middle of Arizona, and it's a dome, and it's a 100% controlled ecological environment. The climate, the temperature, the humidity. They actually, within this dome, it's a little over 3 acres, the size of it. And in this dome, they created an ocean, an actual coral reefs were living in this ocean. They created a desert. They also created a rainforest. They created the ability to create fog. They actually created an environment that mimics the savannah. What they do, they wanted to create this environment, and the whole goal of it initially was to study how do we sustain human life in outer space. So they are able to create this environment just to study and tinker with the environment and climate and tinker with the bacteria that exist with different creatures and animals and different plants and forestation. They begin to tinker with it just to try to see how can we sustain life outside of Earth. What's interesting is they actually never found a lot, to be honest with you. But one thing they did find is they came across this reality that took place. They noticed something. They noticed all the trees that were planted in this dome grew incredibly fast. It grew so much faster than the trees outside of the dome. So here they are, they created this amazing controlled environment, and the trees are growing really fast, and they were surprised at it. But then pretty soon they started all just falling over. And they couldn't figure out why. They're like, why are these trees falling over? They're growing so fast, but they're falling over. They're not staying alive. And they learned there was one thing that they did not provide within the dome. There's one reason why the trees were never able to fully mature. It was wind. There was no wind inside the dome. And because there was no wind inside the dome, the tree was not able to develop the necessary structure to actually stay alive long enough into its full maturity. And they learned that there's something called stress wood. Other people call it reaction wood. That wind, when the wind is blowing trees back and forth consistently, it's actually creating fractures within the wood. And actually the molecular cellular structure of the wood changes and heals. And because it does that, the tree developed the ability to find light and find nutrient because it's got so much resistance. In ancient days, people in North Asia and in the Arctic Circle, they would actually create their bows from this type of wood because there's so much tension within it. I can't help but to wonder how many of us are trying to create our own biospheres. But the one thing we're forgetting is that we need resistance. You actually need a storm in your life. You actually need elements that you don't control. And the challenge is we're all trying to create an environment that we can control. So there's 2 questions I want you to ask yourself today. If you have wind in your life, I know that we all do. The question I want you to ask yourself, are you letting the wind build resilience in you? Or are you looking for ways to create or move to an environment where there's no wind? Nearly 20 years ago, I was talking to a friend of mine who was a friend/mentor, and he was coaching me in some different areas of my life. And again, this was 20 years ago. It's amazing how mature I thought I was 20 years ago. And it's amazing how immature I actually was. And I'm sure I'll say that about this point in my life in 20 years. And Just funny how that works, and all perspective and experience and hindsight. But I remember sitting there talking to my friend, and I made this comment, and I made this comment out of this thought of like, I'm doing pretty good in life. Like, I'm a good leader, I'm mature, and I've handled and managed myself well. So I was saying it from kind of like, I'm proud of myself. And I made this comment, I said, I have no problems or conflicts in my life. And I would actually kind of like, this is the little achievement for me. My friend just looked at me straight in the face and said, the reason why you have no problems or conflict is because you avoid them. They are no longer my friend. Little did I know that the next 20 years, up until today, God would introduce several people in my life that would become tornadoes. And some of you are wondering if Candace is one of those people. Candace is not one of those people. However, she can get a little windy. These people were tornadoes and hurricanes to me. I experienced deep pain, betrayal. I never thought I would experience betrayal, but I experienced it. It is by far, my experience, the hardest thing to overcome and work through is being betrayed. And it's fascinating that the very thing that I don't want was the very thing I actually need. You see, we all want a Jesus that stops storms, but we need the Jesus that sleeps in them. And I can't wonder how many of us are working overtime to create our own environment where there's no wind, there's no conflict, there's no pain, there's no tragedy, there's no stress, there's no pressure. We just want everything to be buttoned up and controlled. And we get to determine when we grow, how we grow, and how much we grow. It doesn't work like that. And without getting into the theological ramifications of this, but I wonder how many situations we're in are actually necessary for you to expand. I wonder how many of these situations we're trying to get out of are actually the very thing. In fact, I have this conviction, if you somehow successfully manage to get out of these situations, guess what? You will experience it again. It's not until you embrace the idea that you are meant for this. You are meant to have the wind push you and bend you in ways that you did not know was possible. To create fractures in the essence of who you are. Because as those fractures heal, guess what? Stress was created, reaction was created, and it actually enables you to find light. One of the things they learned in this study is that stress would actually enable the tree to find the light and the nutrients it needs to continue to grow. And without it, it can't find it. So it's fascinating in the same thought that we also require wind. If you want to find out who you really are, you need wind in your life. You need resistance. You need a hurricane every once in a while to figure out who you really are. Now, as you turn to Matthew 7, we're going to read a passage of Scripture, but I need to contextualize it just for a moment. Matthew 5, 6, and 7 are, specifically Matthew 5 and 6, are what we call the Sermon on the Mount. Most of your Bibles at the beginning of this passage will call this the Sermon on the Mount, which is AKA, many consider the greatest teaching Jesus ever taught. And it's fascinating because you have to understand the context of this talk that he gives. The context is he is now stepping into a position where most people that are listening to him, not all of them, but a lot of them recognize he is the Messiah. When you have been an oppressed people group for hundreds of years, and it accumulates to multiple centuries over the course of your existence, and you've been oppressed, you've been in slavery, you've been in bondage. When you hear the word Messiah, what are you thinking? Whoever that is going to save us from this oppression, from bondage, from slavery. If you're being oppressed, usually when you think of Messiah, you think of someone that's going to overthrow the oppressors and oppress the oppressor. We're just going to reverse the equation now, because now that you've oppressed us, now we're going to oppress you. This is what humans do, is we react, thinking, well, I'm just going to get stronger than you and oppress you. And so specifically, the context that Jesus is stepping into is a people, a Jewish people that have been oppressed. And when they hear a Messiah is coming, and as we learn through the Gospels, we learn that they're ready to overthrow the Roman Empire. And Jesus comes in, imagine the first speech. Everyone's like, hey, our Messiah is about to give his first talk. This is the campaign rally. He had been nominated to run for the emperor, according to us. And Jesus' first words are this: blessed are the poor in spirit. And you're thinking, well, that's a nice opening, but let's get to the meat. Let's get to the part where we can take up arms. We can take up violence, or we can at least take up confidence and overthrow the oppressors. But Jesus continues that tone in Matthew 5. In fact, he gets to the point where he said, blessed are those when you are persecuted. And then he ups the ante. He said, oh, by the way, when the Roman Empire comes and slaps your face, give them the other cheek so they can slap the other side. He continued, and then he began to say, they are going to do evil to you. They are going to hurt you. They are going to do bad, inhumane things to you. This is Jesus' Messiah talk. So by the time you get to Matthew 7, he's finished this incredible, articulate talk that I know resonated, but there was so much dissonance in the souls of humans that were listening because it was not what they wanted to hear. So now we get to Matthew 7, verse 24. Let's pick up at the end of this amazing talk. And Jesus says this, therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and put them into practice is like a wise man who built his house on the rock. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the wind blew and beat against that house. Yet it did not fall because it had its foundation on the rock. But everyone who hears these words of mine does not put them into practice is like a foolish man who built his house on sand. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against that house. I want you to make a note of that word, beat. Not gently touch, not massage, but beat against that house. And it fell with a great crash. Verse 28, when Jesus had finished saying these things, the crowds were amazed at his teaching, because he taught as one who had authority, not as their teachers of the law. I understand some of you have read this passage, and maybe it's been a while since you've read it, and others of you, this could be your very first time you've read this passage. And whenever we read this, there's usually two words that we kind of lock in on. One is rock and sand. And I know for me, growing up in the Christian tradition, you were always told, do not build your house on sand. The house will collapse. But if you find a rock, build it on a rock. Well, in this passage, Jesus actually gives definition of what it means to build on the rock. He said, if you put into practice what I just taught you in chapter 5 and chapter 6, you will find that your house will be built on a rock. But if you don't put into practice what I've just taught you in the last 2 chapters, then you'll find that your house is built on sand. I don't know if you've ever been to the Middle East, specifically in Dubai and Saudi Arabia. Their entire cities, metropolitan cities, are built on sand. And I'm like, wait a second, how are you building something that's not on, I don't know if that ever confuses you, but it's quite mind-blowing what they're able to do with technological advancements. But the whole premise of this passage always emphasizes rock and sand. Build your house on a rock. But the thing we don't talk about enough is there is a storm that is required to find out if you're on a rock or on sand. Oftentimes, like, man, my house is solid. I am on a rock, but there's no storm. You're like, life is great. Everything's good. My character is intact. My mind is sharp. My spirit is good. My soul is healthy. And then the storm comes. And then we get an awakening to the reality of where we actually are at. See, we can't live life thinking everything is solid if there's no storms. You need tension in your life. You need conflict. You need wind in your life. Stop trying to avoid it and actually embrace it. It doesn't take much to embrace. There's so much conflict in the world today. There's so much tension that we all experience. Instead of trying to get out of it and creating your own controlled climate, just accept the fact that this is actually what revealed is your house built on a rock. You see, if you think Jesus was designed just to save you from storms, then you're missing out a part of your humanity that's available to you. And that's one that transcends storms. The ability to transcend every scenario, every situation in life. And that's what Jesus over and over and over teaches. Now, there's another couple things I want to show you that I find interesting. In Matthew 17, if you want to turn there, you can. I'm just going to jump right in. But verse 1 through 3, it says, after 6 days, Jesus took with him Peter, James, and John, and the brother of James. He led up a high mountain by themselves. There he was transfigured before them. His face shone like the sun, and his clothes became as white as the light. Just then there appeared before them Moses and Elijah talking with Jesus. We'll stop right here. This is one of those bizarre passages where Jesus takes 3 disciples, and he goes up on the mountain, and God shows up, and Jesus, his appearance changes. We're not sure exactly what that looked like, or what took place, but what we know, he was transfigured. His appearance changed. What I find fascinating is he only brought 3 of his disciples. He didn't bring all 12. What do you think it was like for the other 9? What do you think it was like for the other 9 to go, wait, how come we're not chosen? You see, Jesus didn't have a problem creating scenarios and contexts to find out what's going on inside your soul. And sometimes we think, no, Jesus wouldn't actually do that. Well, I don't know. Maybe he would. Maybe he actually creates this context to figure, oh, you got a little issue in your heart. You got a little jealousy going on. And you think because you've done everything right, I should just bring you with me. What do you think it was like when Peter, James, and John come down from this bizarre experience? And Jesus tells them, tell no one about what you just saw. How hard would that be to not tell anyone what you just experienced on the mountain, where Jesus changed his appearance, God's voice speaks, Peter doesn't know what to do, so Peter said, let's build a temple here. It's like, shut up, Peter, don't open your mouth right now. I mean, this is the situation. Imagine what it's like for Peter, James, and John to come down the mountain, and the other 9 go, so what happened? Nothing. Nothing. It's obvious something happened. You look different. You experienced something. You had a shared experience with Jesus. And we gave up everything just like you did, and yet Jesus didn't pick us. It was an interesting fact that sometimes you shouldn't get picked on the team on the playground. I don't know if this resonates with you, but maybe you were the one that never got picked as a team on the playground. Maybe you weren't the one that got picked to be a part of the team. Well, they found, though, that some of the most successful, high-achieving, high-performing people on planet Earth right now are the ones that didn't get picked as a kid. Why? They took that resistance and didn't let it define them because they knew who they really were. You see, if you create your internal worth and value on what happened externally, you'll be deeply discouraged. It's the one thing in your life that cannot be built on the external realities. So Peter, James, and John, I love how Jesus picks 3 and doesn't pick the 9. Sometimes you don't get picked. And I want to talk to parents for a moment. And parents, I want to challenge you in this day and age to not create biospheres for your kids. You actually want your kids to experience pressure. You want them to experience some measure of tragedy or what it's like to not get picked on a team. You want them to experience that you didn't create for them. And the challenge is we have such a high value for emotions today. We've gotten incredible at using language like I feel, and we have articulation for it now. When previous generations, they say, I don't feel. I don't feel. I'm dead. Yeah, you killed yourself. And you become 80 years old and you can't figure out why you don't feel like you've lived your life because part of you is dead. So but today, it's a different conversation. We're like, man, everybody knows how they feel. And you get in a conversation with someone, how you doing? I don't know. No, tell me how you feel, what's going on. And we've gotten really good. It's actually beautiful. I actually think there's a lot of beauty in it. The challenge is if you put a period at the end of that conversation, all of a sudden we're raising up an entire generation of people that will be defined by their emotions. And so parents, your goal isn't to just get your kid to identify what they feel. Your goal is to get them to understand that your feelings and your emotions are helping you to understand how you're experiencing the world around you. But it's not who you are. You actually need to find out who you are in the midst of the confusion of emotional experiences. Because Jesus actually is inviting each and every one of us to step into a space, to be elevated as a human, not to just get rescued out of storms. So I want to challenge each of us today. Your goal is to not get out of storms. Your goal is to learn how to sleep in them. Your goal is to learn how to transcend them. Your goal is to get to a space in life where you actually understand, wow, I can navigate these things. I want to give you a couple things that will be helpful in building resilience or building character. You have to fundamentally have this solved or this resolved in your soul, and it's this: you will always get back up. You will always get back up. In fact, there's a great verse in the Bible that said the righteous man will fall 7 times. Isn't it interesting? That is not the Christian equation we would come up with. It's interesting that a righteous man can fall and still be called righteous. Think about that for a second. Because in our Christian equation, if you fall, you're no longer righteous. You are now unrighteous. But somehow in the equation of God and the algorithms of heaven, God's like, no, a righteous man will fall 7 times. Wait a second. A righteous man can fall and still be called righteous? And here's the other problem with this. 7 times. That's a lot. And if you understand the context of that passage, 7 times isn't a definite number. 7 is the idea of you will fall a lot. But the difference is you get back up. And the challenge I see is that we get knocked down, and some of us have decided to not get back up because we don't want to experience the emotional trauma or the emotion that we experience of the pain of falling. Like, well, I don't have to experience that again if I don't actually get back up. So you have to resolve inside you, like, no matter what, determined to always get back up. Second thing I want to leave you with today is this. Embrace the truth that God is building something in you. Embrace the idea that God is actually building something in you. Now, I know some of you right now in this very moment think, well, did God cause this or did God cause that? Like I said, we're not going there today. That's a much deeper, longer conversation. Today, my primary purpose was to help you to understand that everything you're going through, there's actually a way to sleep in them. And Jesus is the one that teaches us. So I want to challenge you, embrace the truth that God is actually building something in you. He loves you way too much to leave you the way you are. Why don't you stand? Jesus, we thank you for what's happening in this room. We thank you for each person and each story. And I understand in this room alone, we've got people on all the spectrums of the human experience right now as I talk. Some people are navigating really hard, challenging things right now, complex things, and not even sure what to do about it. And others of us are like, man, my life had never been better. We're all in between. So I understand, and being aware of just the nature of a gathering like this and all the representation in this room, I pray that we would become a people, a resilient people, a people of deep conviction to make hard decisions, and that we would no longer spend so much time on asking the storms to be stopped, but we'd actually move into a space to invite you to show us how to actually sleep in them, to actually transcend them, And so, Father, I just pray for each of us today as we move out of this space and back into our lives that we would look at the world a little bit differently in the coming days and weeks. And we look at it from the vantage point that you're actually building something within us. You're building within us something that is vital and necessary for the days ahead. As we live in a world of high volatility and unrest and so many complex things going on, that we wouldn't be numb to them, we wouldn't remove ourselves from it, but we'd understand there's actually a way to transcend the dynamics at play. I pray for a grace. I pray for a motivation. I pray for a courage and a bravery to erupt inside of us today. And everybody said, amen, amen. Before you go, I'm going to ask our studio home pastors or leaders, as well as anybody in our leadership team, if you guys can make your way over to the wall over here on my right. And for those of you in this room, before you're dismissed, if you would like someone to pray with you about literally anything, you need healing in your body, or you just have a situation you want prayer about, or you're just hungry for more. If that's you, and as soon as I dismiss you, just make your way over there. We have a team of people over there that would love to just take some time with you. Other than that, have an amazing week. Don't forget, next week is Christmas Kickoff Sunday. You won't want to miss it. We're going to have a special time starting our month-long celebration of Jesus being born. Have a great week, everyone.
So they can see your face in me.